Before we get into the video, I want to let you all know that Callan, Matt, and I have just released 2 new Star Wars videos on our Fanalsyis channel. The first is a brief discussion on the current state of the franchise. The second ranks all 11 live-action theatrical Star Wars films from worst to best. This is easily one of the biggest videos we have ever done, so definitely check it out when you're done here. Links will be in the description. Hello everyone, EvanNova95 here, and welcome to another installment of Star Wars How Powerful Is, the series where we explore the strength and abilities of those in a galaxy far, far away. Today we will be going over Desann, the primary antagonist of the video game Jedi Knight II, Jedi Outcast. Now, this is a topic I've had lingering in the back of my head for a while, and given the discussion sparked by my NJO Council ranking video, I figured now would finally be the time to give Desann the credit he deserves. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Desann is actually extremely underrated. Many tend to disregard him as some generic dark side thug of no consequence, despite the series going out of its way to prove the opposite. Desann may not have the aura of Inquisitor Jarek, the edginess of Tavion Aximus, or the commanding presence of Marka Ragnos, but he is by no means unimpressive. And to not even include him in the discussion of the series' most formidable video game villains frankly does a massive disservice to the character, one which this video will hopefully help to rectify a tiny bit. In terms of structure, this video will follow many of the same power scaling beats as my previous HBI videos, with Desann's analysis being centered on how the Dark Jedi stacks up exclusively within the confines of his own franchise. Reference material will be taken from the main Dark Forces games and their supporting sources. Statements made by creators will also be considered if they are reputable and do not drastically contradict the narratives presented in their stories. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Desann's true strength, I think it prudent to recap his story to highlight the essential aspects of his development. The first thing a lot of people overlook regarding Desann is his age. While his exact birth date is never specified, he's actually implied to be on the young side, given that the Paraxium had only been in operation for little over a year before the events of Jedi Outcast. He speaks of Kyle's exploits at the Valley as though it were an old story, and since the 28-year-old Havit Storm is confirmed to have been one of his peers at the Academy, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that Desann fell into a similar age range. This may sound like an incidental detail at first, until you consider everything the Dark Jedi would go on to accomplish in his relatively short life. Desann was born to the Chistori species on an unnamed planet, presumably in the galaxy's outer reaches. Chistori were bipedal reptilian aliens noted for their fierce independence and massive size, with the 5'9" Kyle Katarn barely coming up to Desann's sternum. Despite being born warriors, the Chistori's isolationism caused them to view the Force as a strange and unfamiliar thing, which made Desann a pariah amongst his own people, living a life of loneliness and despair before he was discovered by the new Jedi Order and brought to Yavin. Desann trained at the Jedi Academy alongside various apprentices, receiving instruction directly from Luke Skywalker himself. This is our first major indication of Desann's potential. If the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy sees you as worthy of one-on-one training, you're clearly doing something right, especially considering how insanely strong Luke's other direct apprentices, such as Corran Horn, Kip Duron, or Kyle Katarn himself, ended up becoming. Desann initially thrived within the NJO, as he finally felt a sense of belonging and acceptance. However, old wounds are often the most difficult to heal. Feelings of rage and resentment instilled in him by so many years of being treated like an outcast slowly began to set back in. And as Desann's powers matured, his true, violent nature began to reveal itself. He started to view the Force as not a shield to protect the useless, but as a weapon to empower the worthy. Desann bullied his fellow students regularly until one Jedi trainee, the aforementioned Havit Storm, finally stood up to him. Havit and Desann took part in a training session, with Desann striking Havit down in cold blood, proclaiming that he was too weak to be a Jedi. Desann's fall to the dark side of the Force had finally begun. Fleeing the academy before his elders could counsel him, Desann trained on his own, refining everything Luke had taught him while using his powerful emotions to harness more dark side power. Desann eventually allied with Imperial Admiral Gallic Fyar, who promptly introduced the Chistori to Lord Hethrier, a former student of Darth Vader who led the Empire Reborn insurgency. Despite his prejudices towards non-humans, Hethrier appointed Desann as his second-in-command, and tasked him with training the Remnant's Force-sensitive youths, reasoning that Palpatine had made exceptions with certain aliens in the past. It was also probably one of those I'd rather have him with me than against me situations. Desann shared his knowledge of the dark side with the Empire youth, taking one of them, a woman named Tavion Aximus, as his apprentice. In addition to training adepts, Desann spent his time with the Empire experimenting with imbuing soldiers with the power of the Force, through a combination of artesian crystals and Sith alchemy, which eventually led to the formation of the Reborn and Shadow Trooper factions. Hethrier and Desann also scoured the stars for the location of the legendary Valley of the Jedi, believing that its incredible power would be the catalyst to make their army unstoppable. It is here we finally come to the main story of Jedi Outcast. Desann first encounters Kyle Katarn on Artus Prime, and after bullying the rebel agent, who had severed his connection to the Force, Desann ordered Tavion to kill Kyle's partner, Jan Ors. This action drives Kyle into a revenge quest, and he journeys to the Valley of the Jedi to regain his powers. Unbeknownst to him, this was exactly what Desann was hoping for, as Kyle's haste allowed him to be trailed, finally revealing the valley's location to the Imperial Remnant. Desann, Hethrier, Tavion, and their soldiers would immerse themselves in the energies of the Valley of the Jedi, multiplying their powers several times over. Lowly adepts were transformed into fearsome soldiers of darkness, while Desann evolved into a true force of elemental destruction. Desann waged an all-out war against the New Republic and the New Jedi Order. Although Kyle Katarn caused the Dark Jedi several setbacks, such as defeating Tavion and rescuing Jan, who it turned out wasn't killed, Desann was determined to have his vengeance, at one point even clashing with his former master Luke aboard the Karin installation before escaping. Everything came to a head when Desann and his forces launched an all-out attack on the Jedi Paraxium. Killing his way to the heart of the Great Temple, Desann increased his powers even further by siphoning the energies of the planet's ancient Force Nexus. Kyle arrived soon thereafter, declaring a new future for the galaxy. Desann was shocked to learn that Katarn had helped destroy his flagship along with most of the forces on board, including Gallic Fyar. When Katarn went on to reveal that the real Jedi were currently mopping up the Shadow Troopers, the Dark Jedi finally realized he had underestimated Kyle from the start. Desann tried to convert Katarn to his side, but in a bit of a twist of fate, received a counter-offer instead. Holding out his hand, Kyle invited Desann back to the Jedi. Enraged, Desann drew his lightsaber and the two began to fight. Despite the recent amplification to his powers, Kyle ultimately defeated Desann after a furious lightsaber duel, his darkness fading away within the very temple from which it was born. Now, as I think that recap made clear, Desann's development was unorthodox, but also fairly linear. Going from a shunned outcast to a terrifying Dark Jedi through training, experimentation, and external augmentation. The question then becomes how this unique development impacted his actual moveset, and the answer is, quite simply, a lot. Next, we will be going over Desann's moveset, specifically his tools, his martial training, and his arsenal of force techniques. Despite outfitting his shadow troopers with cortosis armor, there is strangely no indication that Desann's chestplate and shoulder pauldrons were made of the same material. Either this was a game oversight, or the Dark Jedi felt too proud to use it. We know he didn't approve of shields, after all. Desann wielded a single-bladed lightsaber constructed to fit the Chistori's large hands with silver and black plating. Much like Voldemort's magic wand, Desann's saber oozed menace, with a sharp hook near the emitter and a spiked ball on the pommel, just in case you forgot he was the bad guy. Although his blade color as a Jedi is unknown, he proudly displayed a blood-red blade during Outcast, further evidence of his allegiance to the dark side of the Force. As noted by multiple sources, Desann's primary martial arts discipline was strong style, with the form's emphasis on power allowing him to use his size and reach to his best advantage, albeit at the detriment of agility. That said, given Desann's in-game fighting mechanics along with his training of Tavion plus a large swath of the Reborn, it's likely that the Chistori also possessed a technical understanding, if not outright mastery, of the medium and fast styles as well. I also wouldn't be surprised if Luke passed on his knowledge of Degem So to Desann, given how nicely the form aligns with the Dark Jedi's fighting style, though, again, totally unconfirmed. In regards to Force combat, Desann, as is often the case for Dark Forces bosses, possessed every power utilized by the game's dark side enemies cranked up to 11. Not only could he destroy large structures and shake the foundation of temples like they were nothing, but he has even conjured blasts powerful enough to stagger Luke Skywalker. Granted, there's some context there, which we'll get to in a bit, but it's still an insane feat regardless, especially considering how strong Luke was at that point in the series. In terms of on-screen techniques, Desann has displayed physical augmentation, Force sense, Force illusions, Force drain, and Force lightning. Although the exact magnitude of his lightning is unclear, given that the Sith variant is noted to be a technique even the most powerful Jedi Masters struggle to deal with, the fact that he can use it in any capacity really goes a long way towards buffing his combative viability, since even low-level applications have been shown to grant serious benefits. In regards to off-screen techniques, Desann's character sheet credits him with Battle Mind, Force Fear, Self-Healing, Dark Rage, and the Mind Trick, all of which being abilities with a significant degree of versatility. Overall, a pretty solid moveset for a dark side warrior. His weapons and fighting style take advantage of his innate physical characteristics, while his mixture of conventional and esoteric force powers help him to keep foes on their back foot. Finally, we have this video's most detailed and important segment, which centers around Desann's lore, combat feats, and scaling. Although his entry in the Threats of the Galaxy sourcebook states that Desann is, quote, not as powerful as many Jedi Masters, this is contradicted by his fights with Luke and Kyle, as well as the multiple Jedi instructors we see dead at his feet before the final level of the game. We can make sense of this, however, with the added context of this statement being in reference to Desann during his quest to secure methods for creating the Reborn, which would be a much weaker version of the character than the one seen at the end of Jedi Outcast. This segues nicely into our next major point of scaling. Desann's power level goes through 3 distinct phases throughout the game. You have Desann on Artus Prime, the one who stomped Forceless Kyle, Desann after being powered up by the Valley of the Jedi, who fought Luke, and Desann after being powered up by the Force Nexus of Yavin, who fought Jedi Kyle. The difference between these phases is actually pretty fucking insane, with it being stated by multiple sources that Desann's power was quadrupled when he went into the Valley. For any Dragon Ball fans watching, that's quite literally like going from Super Saiyan 2 to Super Saiyan 3. And that wasn't even the Lizard Man's final form, as he would gain another power boost from the Force Nexus of Yavin 4 shortly before his death. While Desann's Yavin amp has never been attributed any direct multiplier or linear addition, the planet is consistently portrayed as one of the more potent nexuses of Force energy in the Star Wars universe. Even if Desann only got a 10% buff from Yavin, which, let's be real, is absurd downplay, he would still be more powerful than the version of himself that clashed with Luke, which, again, despite the variables we'll get into, is pretty damn impressive. In regards to more, shall we say, meta-scaling, there are several illusions made between Desann and the previous Dark Forces big bad, Inquisitor Jarek. Both are referred to as power-hungry individuals of the worst kind by the Wizards of the Coast website, with the two even being illustrated side by side in the Essential Guide to the Force, despite never actually meeting in canon. Although these comparisons are mainly centered on the Dark Jedi's portrayals, if they are even remotely a reference to strength, they are still major lore buffs for Desann, given that Jarek is confirmed to rival Darth Vader in power. Moving into feats, Desann is heavily implied to have fought Luke Skywalker at the Valley of the Jedi. This bout was entirely off-screen. However, Luke does state that he managed to scatter Desann and his reborn troops, with Rogue Squadron chasing away their ships, thereby sealing off the valley from the Imperial Remnant. Not a total defeat for the Dark Jedi, but a defeat nonetheless. Desann and Luke would later have an on-screen rematch aboard the Karin installation. Although little of this duel was shown, both combatants were depicted clashing back and forth, with Desann successfully hitting Luke with a Force Blast and trapping him under a pillar of rubble with a saber throw. Luke emerged uninjured, but Desann was able to capitalize on the opening he had created to make his escape. To say that this is an impressive display of Desann's capabilities is an understatement. It may not have been prime Luke Skywalker. However, Luke, around the time of Jedi Outcast, is stated to be stronger than ever, which would include the Leia amped version of himself that defeated peak Darth Sidious in Dark Empire 1. Now, to be clear, it is very much in character for Luke to hold back against his former students. However, Desann's ability to contend with him in any capacity is still awe-inspiring, given how much of a beast Luke is. Darth Vader stated that Luke was the strongest of all Jedi as of Empire Strikes Back. So even if the Grand Master was nerfing himself down to Episode 5 levels, this would still mean that Desann clashed with someone arguably above everyone in the prequel era. Yes, I know. It's a little weird, but lore and on-screen deviations are hardly anything new to this franchise. Getting back on topic, Jedi Outcast co-director Kevin Schilder has allegedly stated that Desann can pose a legitimate threat to Luke, even on neutral ground. I say allegedly because I sadly still can't find the original version of this post. However, the game itself confirms that the Dark Jedi did successfully get the drop on the Jedi Master, so it's not like it's entirely baseless. This statement can radically alter Desann's scaling depending on one's interpretation, and I'll go over where those alterations could lead in the final analysis. Next, we have Desann's most famous feat, his final battle with Kyle Katarn at the heart of the Great Temple of Yavin 4. Although there are some ambiguities surrounding the canon rendition of this confrontation, we do see Desann absorbing the power of the temple's Force Nexus beforehand, with the Wizards of the Coast website referring to it as a furious lightsaber duel, signifying that it had not been an easy victory for Kyle. Makes sense considering that this was a stronger version of the Dark Jedi than the one who clashed with Luke. Despite the loss, Desann pushing Katarn to a high diff speaks quite well of him overall. Kyle may not have been close to his Battle Master peak, however, Outcast-era Kyle still has a lot of impressive lore behind him. In fact, Jedi Academy's co-lead, John Zook, has stated that one of the reasons the plot shifted to focus on Jaden Core was that the writers felt that Kyle had grown so powerful that he would have, quote, breezed through everything as a Jedi superhero. Meaning that end of Outcast Kyle Katarn was stronger than any of the Academy villains, including Tavion and Marka Ragnos. If that wasn't proof enough, the official Jedi Academy strategy guide states point blank that Kyle is a much more difficult foe than Marka Ragnos, which, while a reference to the game's darkside ending, is consistent with canon material. So, yeah, Desann may not have a ton of feats to his name, but what he lacks in quantity, he most assuredly makes up for in quality. Alright, so in conclusion, how powerful is Desann? Despite being the least characterized boss in the Dark Forces series, given everything from his lore to his on-screen feats, there is no question that Desann is one of the most formidable video game villains in all of Star Wars, as well as one of the strongest Dark Jedi, period. Though largely self-taught, his weapons and fighting style do well to capitalize on his Chistori physicality, and his Valley of the Jedi and Yavin amps grant him an insane level of raw force power. His lore has a few inconsistencies, but none that break the character's scaling. I think it's fair to say that he is weaker than both Outcast Luke Skywalker and Kyle Katarn, since he did lose to them, but as I've said, the fact that it is Luke and Kyle we're talking about doesn't make Desann's losses look that bad in the grand scheme of things. In fact, due to Outcast Kyle being confirmed to be stronger than Marka Ragnos, Desann's ability to push him to a high diff solidifies the Dark Jedi as being stronger than a large percentage of video game Sith Lords. This is because Ragnos has lore placing his strength on a similar, if not higher tier than Naga Sadow, who himself is confirmed by KOTOR 2's director and writer Chris Avallone to have been stronger than end-of-game Darth Nihilus. Yeah. In terms of more direct scaling, Desann's statements and feats can be taken in several different directions depending on interpretation. As such, for the sake of discussion, I'm going to wrap this video up with a low-ball, mid-ball, and high-ball assessment of the character's strength. Low-balled, I would rank end-of-game Desann on the same tier as Inquisitor Jarek. I don't think too many people will find that to be an outlandish placement due to the multiple illusions made between them, and narratively speaking, it wouldn't make a ton of sense for the boss of a Dark Forces sequel to be radically weaker than the one who preceded them, unless there's a story-specific reason like with Tavion. This would mean that even a low-balled Desann is still far stronger than a large percentage of the franchise, given what I said earlier about Jarek rivaling Vader in power. Mid-balled, I would rank end-of-game Desann on the same tier as Darth Vader and Darth Sidious during Return of the Jedi. Vader is repeatedly stated to be the preemptive master of lightsaber combat during the original trilogy, with George Lucas believing that his power level was equal to 80% that of Sidious's in Episode 6. This is where I personally think it makes the most sense to rank Desann, and it almost entirely revolves around his battle with Luke Skywalker. While it is very likely that Luke was holding back against his former pupil, Considering that Luke at this point is stronger than the version of himself that beat DE Sidious, who is way more powerful than ROTJ Sidious, I simply can't see Desann being able to get the drop on and clash with the Jedi Master without being on a semi-similar level to the Episode 6 Sith. And remember, this was Desann before his Yavin amp, so if he wasn't on that tier before, he probably was after that. Whether or not he would beat Vader or Sidious is its own debate, but we're just talking tiers here. This would mean that a mid-bald Desann is, again, breezing through most of the Star Wars universe, since Return of the Jedi Vader and Sidious are leagues above themselves from the prequel trilogy. Finally, we come to the highball. In this section, I would rank end-of-game Desann on a similar tier to Darth Sidious during the time frame of Dark Empire 1. Now, this is a big stretch, and based on the results of the community poll I posted a while back, a lot of you agree. However, if you take this Kevin Schilder's scan as 100% reliable, with Desann being someone strong enough to pose a legitimate threat to Jedi Outcast Luke even on neutral ground, then you could use it as evidence for Desann being maybe not equal to DE Sidious, but at least on a comparable tier of strength. Again, this all revolves around the indisputable fact that Outcast Luke is stronger and more experienced than himself from Dark Empire, where he beat Sidious at his best. Yes, he had help from Leia, but as I've said in past videos, the comic explicitly states that Leia was unlocking more of Luke's innate resources rather than temporarily boosting him. And frankly, it wouldn't matter even if that was what she did, since Luke is stated to be stronger than ever, which would logically include his Leia amped self from DE. All that being said, Desann being able to pose a legitimate threat to someone stronger than Sidious is not the same thing as equaling someone stronger than Sidious. You can say that Anakin in Attack of the Clones briefly posed a legitimate threat to Dooku, but it didn't stop him from getting his arm chopped off. The vagueness of the language and the lack of concrete feats makes this ranking for Desann a massive highball for me. But I will acknowledge that the conversation is at least possible. Looks like the Dinosaur Man was much more than he seemed after all. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this installment of Star Wars How Powerful Is. I had a lot of fun putting this video together after so long, and I'm very excited to hear what you all have to say about the content and writing style I used compared to past episodes. As always, leave any thoughts or questions in the comments section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.